All right. I think with 5 after now, we've got a good core of folks that are here. I know some folks are still trickling in, but I believe we will go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Crone. I am the Vice President of Member Services here with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, and I'm so excited and grateful for this partnership between the City of Minneapolis, the City of St. Paul, the St. Paul Area Chamber, and the Minneapolis Regional Chamber for today's summit, Gateways for Growth. A couple of housekeeping items just to be aware of as you enter the meeting. You'll note that your audio and video have been muted, so we don't have all of that external background noise during our morning presentation. If you have questions during this presentation, please feel free to use the chat function. So questions will be considered for our speakers that way. Can't guarantee we'll get to all of them, but we'll do their best. So please use that chat function. You can also communicate with the host if you're running into any trouble using that chat function. Just so you are aware, this webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording in a post-event email. With that, I am going to toss it over to my colleague, Grace Waltz, our Vice President of Public Policy here with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, to introduce our first hour and kick things off. Take it away, Grace.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Like Megan said, my name is Grace Waltz. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy at the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. Before we kick things off, I'm just going to do some level setting as to why we're all here today. So in the fall of 2020, the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, in partnership with the City of Minneapolis and the City of St. Paul, with support from the St. Paul Area Chamber, applied for and were awarded the Gateways for Growth Challenge grant, making us only 2 of 19 communities across the country that were chosen for this opportunity. And the Gateways for Growth Challenge, or G4G as we usually call it, is a competitive opportunity for localities to receive research support and technical assistance from New American Economy, which is now American Immigration Council, and Welcoming America, with the goal of improving immigrant inclusion in our communities. The Minneapolis and St. Paul were both awarded research reports as well as direct technical assistance, which allowed us to work with community stakeholders to build a multi-sector strategic plan with the goal of improving immigrant and refugee inclusion in the Twin Cities. So we're going to spend some time digging into the results of both of those reports, but first I'm going to pass it over to the leaders of both chambers to talk about why we are prioritizing this important work. So Jonathan, you are up first.
Well, good morning and thank you, Grace. Welcome everyone. Great to be here today. Jonathan Weinhagen, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. I want to take a moment to provide our gratitude for your interest in this topic this morning, and to thank our teams. Bea and I are going to have an opportunity to talk about the importance of this work. It's critically important, but I also want to acknowledge the really important work that has come before us in the midst of a pandemic to make this report, and more importantly, the next steps, an opportunity for all of us. So the teams at the 2 chambers and in our cities, thank you for the work that you've done and the work that we will do together. The Minneapolis Regional Chamber has had a long history with New American Economy. So when the Gateways for Growth opportunity presented itself, no brainer. I mean, we didn't think twice about engaging and thinking about how do we bring this technical expertise to our region. And Bea and her team at the St. Paul Chamber were right there with us. No hesitation, let's do this. We've got to figure this out. We know that our state's character is inseparable from the story of immigration. And the research that you're about to hear will talk to you about how immigration is a cornerstone for our economic competitiveness. And that's something that we celebrate and want to lean into and think about moving forward. We also know that our immigrants and refugee communities face really remarkable and significant barriers when it comes to economic opportunities. So we're thinking about, a future where we can work with partners across the region to advance self-opportunity, wealth building, and pathways to careers, creating more opportunity across Minneapolis and St. Paul. So really grateful for the data that you're going to hear today, for the opportunity that we're going to lean into today and tomorrow and moving forward. And grateful as always to be alongside my partner in region building, Ms. Bea Kyle from the St. Paul Area Chamber, who will now probably say things that are way more eloquent than I did.
You're funny. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Jonathan. Really glad to be in partnership on this. My name is Bea Kyle. I'm the president and CEO of the St. Paul Area Chamber. And truly, I share in the pleasure of joining you this morning as we present our report, The Journey to Belonging in the Twin Cities. And that report recommends strategies intended to make the region more welcoming for immigrants and refugees. As of 2019, over 125,000 immigrants lived in St. Paul and Minneapolis. That's almost 1 in 5 of us, and the numbers are growing. In St. Paul specifically, over 62% of the city's population growth from 2014 to 2019 is attributable to immigrants. And they fight above their weight. Together, immigrants and refugees represent 20% of the population, and yet more than 22% of St. Paul's employed workforce and 33% of our business owners. Their economic impact is undeniable, and it is incumbent upon us to ensure nothing stands in the way of future growth. And you'll hear more about the report from our panelists ahead. Sincere thanks, as Jonathan has indicated, really sincere thanks to the Welcoming America and the American Immigration Council team who led us through this work, and our partners locally within the cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, as well as the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. Special thanks needs to go to Edmundo Lijo from the City of St. Paul's Attorney's Office, Rita Dibble, the Vice President of Advancement and Foundation Executive Director at Metro State University, Michelle Rivero from the City of Minneapolis, and Grace Walt from the Minneapolis Chamber, who frankly kept us all together. So our orientation for this journey began in December of 2020. We and our advisory committee worked through the next year. And from my perspective, the top priority for this effort and the reason for my personal commitment to the work is stabilization, inclusion, and wealth creation for the immigrant and refugee community. Immigration is critical to our future economic success. The growth in numbers reflects both a strength and an opportunity for the region, and we have the responsibility to empower the immigrant and refugee communities to thrive here and improve their outcomes across all measures. Tomorrow's success depends on wise decisions today, and I'd like to refer back to what Governor Walz himself said at his State of the State last week. He said, "It's not enough to point out a problem. We need to come up with solutions and produce results for the people of Minnesota." So this report is the beginning of that work, and we're delighted to be here. So back to you, Grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bea and Jonathan. With that, I'm going to shift us into the heart of our keynote panel, which is a presentation from our Gateways for Growth partner organizations, Welcoming America and American Immigration Council, formerly New American Economy. So joining us today is Molly Hillegas, who's Network Director at Welcoming America, and Asma Issa, who's Manager for State and Local Initiatives at the American Immigration Council. And just as a reminder, if folks have questions as our presenters are speaking, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will do our best to get to them at the end. So Molly, I'm going to kick things off with you. As folks on this call have probably seen, and as we've discussed last month, we released the Journey to Belonging, which is that multi-sector strategic plan focused on workforce and economic development, equitable access, affordable housing, public safety, community connectedness, amongst other things. And this plan was a result of our participation in the Gateways for Growth Challenge. So I think it'd be great if you could go into a little detail about what this program is and how other cities across the country have approached it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Grace, and the whole team in the Twin Cities for having Asma and I here today. We're so excited to be able to share in the celebration of the work that y'all have done over the past about 18 months. And so I'm going to share a little bit more detail about what that is. And then Asma is going to talk a little bit about the in-depth demographics of the Twin Cities. So it's kind of the roadmap for today. So as Grace mentioned, my name is Molly Hillegas. I am the Network Director with Welcoming America. And let me see if I can advance my slides somehow. There we go. They're moving. For you all, Welcoming America is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization leading a movement of inclusive communities to become more prosperous by ensuring that everyone belongs. We believe that all people, including immigrants, are valued contributors and vital to the success of our communities and our shared futures. So much along the lines of the values we heard from our other speakers yet this morning. So I'm glad we're all here to celebrate that piece of the work. The Welcoming Network is comprised of over 300 nonprofits and local governments who are working to do that hard work of building that more inclusive, welcoming community across the United States and abroad. We actually have about 8 countries that we're also working in currently. Folks in this network and doing this work are really driven by the conviction that communities make better decisions when residents of all backgrounds, identities, and perspectives are meaningfully engaged. And so Welcoming America has built an entire organization on this concept of welcoming. But what exactly do we mean, and how does that play out very specifically in programs like Gateways for Growth? Being welcoming is really much more than being friendly, tolerant, or peaceful. We believe that truly welcoming places have intentional, inclusive policies and norms that enable all residents to contribute, thrive, and live their best and wholest life, and including immigrants and refugees. Welcoming places are really made possible by welcoming people, leaders, including immigrants themselves, students, librarians, folks that work in government, business owners. Each of us is really empowered to foster more belonging places at work and in our neighborhoods and in places and in all of our places of gathering. Local communities across the country have long seen the positive effects of a growing immigrant population. An influx of newcomers drives population growth, revitalizes neighborhoods, spurs innovation, and enriches communities with cultural diversity. In the face of this, many local governments, chambers of commerce, and nonprofits have begun thinking more proactively about what it means to create an environment that sends a message of inclusion and social cohesion and maximizes the contributions of all residents, and really gives communities the tools they need to thrive together. Supporting communities in advancing their welcoming work and building a welcoming infrastructure is really at the heart of what we do. And one of the core programs that supports communities in advancing this work is through the Gateways for Growth Challenge, which really is the reason that we are all here today. So to support and scale immigrant inclusion planning, American Immigration Council and Welcoming America launched the Great Gateways for Growth Challenge in 2016. And this is a competitive opportunity for public and private sector. I think this is a really important point to touch on. An opportunity for public and private sector organizations to apply jointly for 2 tiers of support around immigrant inclusion and welcoming in their communities. And I think when we think about the ways in which we build the infrastructure and the muscle to really create and support immigrants, refugees, and create inclusive policy, it really is the public-private partnership coming together that can make that happen in our communities in a really special way. So as I mentioned, the Gateways for Growth program encompasses 2 forms of support from AIC and Welcoming America. The first is around targeted research and tailored customized economic reports. And Asma's going to talk a little bit about the outcomes of that in a few minutes. So I won't spend much time on that. But the other part is around tailored technical assistance to create an immigrant inclusion plan. To this date, the Twin Cities join 71 other localities in 35 different states who have also completed this. So it's a great national movement of communities who are making this commitment. This year, Minneapolis and St. Paul were both able to receive technical assistance and research reports. And I think, as has been mentioned before, have joined about 19 other communities in doing this work. So through our cohort, you all are joining communities like Columbus, Ohio, Miami, Florida, Gainesville, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and many others. So I think it's a really fantastic way to think about your work in the Twin Cities as part of a real national movement. The 12 to 18 month program that actually encompasses the Gateways for Growth Challenge really walks communities, cities, counties through a process of identifying multi-sector stakeholders to convene a committee to create an immigrant inclusion plan, a community-wide immigrant inclusion plan. Tasking this group with this charge is no short order. And I think the folks in Minneapolis and St. Paul have really stepped up to the plate and given a lot of themselves in this process as well. And from where I sit at a national organization, I just want to say thank you to all of you for all the time that you've put in. The folks who have been working on this project have been meeting together, hosting focus groups, developing surveys about the needs and interests and opportunities for immigrants and refugees in the community, and engaging with folks to create recommendations that support more equitable and inclusive outcomes across the city. Both cities, actually. In the Twin Cities, you all began forming these, and many of the folks here have been doing this work. So I'm not saying anything that you aren't living today. But they began forming these groups and plans about 18 months ago, and they are the folks who have been working to draft the plan over the past 18 months. They've been meeting monthly. They've been doing outreach into the community, all with the goal of incorporating findings into their plan. And it's really just been incredible to witness the thoughtfulness, diligence, and passion from all the local leaders who have worked so hard to produce this plan today. The plan really works through the needs and opportunities in the community and categorizes and reflects that feedback back on, as Grace was talking about, the framework areas of the welcoming standard, which is really welcoming America's on-ramp and roadmap to creating inclusive policy in your community. And then after that plan is drafted, then it goes back to the community for more feedback and more community input, and really gets honed in on what are the most specific and timely priorities for the community today. And once all that has happened, the plan really becomes finalized. And at this point, Grace and Bea and Edmundo and Michelle have been coordinating with you all as local leaders, with city and private sector folks, to really bring us to where we are today. And so, that's the space where we can hope to better understand the plan itself as we move into the breakouts this afternoon, and help us to better understand the demographics and economic impact of the region. I think I'm going to turn it over to back to Grace to introduce my friend Asma. So thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Molly. And I think, Asma, as we talked about, another key component of this grant was those customized research reports. So can you talk a little bit about what those key findings were, and then kind of also cover what comes next now that we have all this data? What are the best ways that we should use this information?
Of course. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Grace. So again, I want to sort of mimic everyone else's thoughts and appreciation of everyone being here and joining us today. We know that this is a really important subject, and we're just so happy that so many people are engaged. I do want to say a special thank you to the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, the St. Paul Area Chamber, and both cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's been really amazing and inspirational to see the amount of work and effort that has been put into this work over the past year and a half, as Molly said. And we're really looking forward to seeing where this work takes you all, and we hope to continuously support all of the organizations and stakeholders, and also any other new adventures that this might be able to lead to. My name is Asma Eason. I'm the manager of state and local initiatives at the American Immigration Council. So I'm going to just give a brief overview of our organization before diving into the key findings of the research reports themselves. There will be a lot of data, but all of the data that is included in the reports, I will not be sharing on in the presentations. It would just take too long. So please feel free. I'll be dropping links in the chat to check out the research reports at a later time. And if you do have any questions about any of the data, you can go ahead and feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Okay, just one second. Okay, so I just want to give a brief introduction and explanation of our organization as we've merged into a new organization. So previously, New American Economy, we were a bipartisan research and advocacy organization looking to change the narrative about immigrants in America. So we started about a little over 10 years ago, and in our work, we use original research to quantify exactly how immigrants are an asset at every level of our economy and every level of the community. And then we use this narrative to bring together leadership across cities and states and the business community. Next slide, please. So a little exciting news, just in January of this year, New American Economy merged with the American Immigration Council. So we have formed a new American Immigration Council. So this new council will provide a full suite of programs that no other single organization offers. The council was established nearly 40 years ago as the hub of research, policy, and advocacy for over 16,000 immigration lawyers of the American Immigration Lawyer Association. And we work to ensure that immigrants have a robust set of rights that they can exercise to secure their place in American society through impactful litigation, policy, advocacy, data analysis, and storytelling. Next slide. So I am part of the state and local team at the American Immigration Council. And so previously at New American Economy, this team was created to really focus on efforts that were being led by state and local leaders. So around 7 years ago, this was when this team was created at New American Economy. And it was really born after comprehensive immigration reform fell apart at the federal level. So we saw a really big desire from states and local leaders to be more proactive in approaching immigration within their own communities. We work in over 100 communities across the country, from cities as diverse as Grand Forks, North Dakota, all the way to Texas, Dallas, Texas. And we use our research highlighting the crucial need to continue investing in immigrant integration in places like Minnesota and others that have long attracted immigrants. Next slide. So I'm here to share a little bit of the data that we found through the research reports on new Americans in Minneapolis, and then as well as new Americans in St. Paul. So I just want to give a few keynotes of understanding where this data was pulled from. It was pulled from the American Community Survey from the years of 2014 to 2019. And for the Minneapolis area, we looked at the area that includes the city of Minneapolis and a part of the city of St. Anthony. And then I also want to note that for our purposes, when we refer to immigrants, this also includes anyone that was not born in the US and not to US citizens. So it does include people that are naturalized US citizens, people with green cards, those here that are on visas, the undocumented population, DACA status, immigrants, refugees. Next slide. And for the report in St. Paul, we focused on St. Paul, the city, and then later there was a spotlight on the East Metro area, which refers to Ramsey, Dakota, and Washington counties in Minnesota. And so the way that these research reports were created in the beginning was that our team, our research team at the American Immigration Council, sat with both teams in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and we provided a data menu of, what we can pull from and what areas we think can provide value to communities and where we've seen value that have been given to other communities. But we also give a space of the local leaders that we work with for them to share with us if there are any points or data points that they're particularly interested in. And so it's a little bit of a back and forth between them and our research team of finding exactly, what are we able to include in this data? What could limitations be? And also what geoscope they want to include. Some communities decide to look at the city level. Some communities decide to look at the metro level. Some like to look at a regional level. It just depends on your purposes and what you like to do, but it also depends on data sample sizes. So that just includes a lot of back and forth with our research team and local leaders until we're able to get to a point that we feel most comfortable with the local leaders, that they feel most comfortable going forward and pulling that data. So we can get into the next slide. So the first area that I'll talk about is immigrant population in both cities. So in the Minneapolis area, immigrants accounted for 14.9% of the population in 2019, which is slightly higher than the national average of 13.6, but it's nearly double the average immigrant population across the state of Minnesota. So as we all know, Minneapolis is quite diverse. Next slide. We also looked at a trend over time. So we looked from 2014 to 2019, the overall Minneapolis area population grew by 6.3%, and the immigrant population grew by 2.4%. So this means that 5.9% of the overall population growth in the area came from immigrants. Next slide. When looking at these same statistics in St. Paul, we found that immigrants accounted for 19.9% of the population. And they also accounted for, next slide. Thank you. They also accounted for 62% of the overall population growth, which I know Bea mentioned in her earlier remarks. It's absolutely amazing. When looking at the data from 2014 to 2019, we found that the overall St. Paul population grew by 4.4%, but the immigrant population grew by 15.2%. So that's where that 62.4% population growth attributable to immigrants came from. Next slide. So one of the things that we like to look at for both for all research reports, but particularly for Minneapolis and St. Paul, is really understanding where immigrants are coming from. And so in Minneapolis, we found that the top country of origin for immigrants in 2019 was Somalia, accounting for 20.3%, and then followed by Mexico, Ethiopia, Ecuador, India, and the list goes down to the top 15 countries of origin. Next slide. When looking at this data for St. Paul, we found that the top country of origin for immigrants in 2019 was Laos, accounting for 15% of the immigrant population, followed by Thailand, Mexico, Burma, Ethiopia, and then we followed this list as far down as 14 top countries of origin. Next slide. Another area that we pull data and pay a special attention to is the area that immigrants are having a real concrete economic impact. So we look at immigrants in the area and their immigrant household total income and their contributions to taxes and spending power. So in Minneapolis, we found that immigrant households total income was 1.7 billion in 2019 alone. Of that, 159 million went to state and local taxes, and more than 284 million went to federal taxes, which left immigrants with 1.2 billion in spending power. Next slide. When looking at St. Paul, we found that immigrant households total income was 1.3 billion, which 120 million went to state and local taxes, and more than 182 million went to federal taxes, leaving them with 966 million in spending power. So when we look at spending power, this is really important to pay attention to because this is disposable income, which can be infused back into the local economy, where they can shop at grocery stores, retail stores, restaurants. And so we see that immigrants are contributing not only to a tax base that supports the region's infrastructure, but also they create a solid foundation of consumer spending. Next slide. So one of the areas we look at, and we like to put it into a little bit of a national perspective, is median age. And in the US, the median age of the US population is climbing. So we are finding that immigrants are contributing to the region, but a lot of people sometimes ask, why is it important to include immigrant integration as part of a community and economic strategy for the region? And when speaking, when looking at the Midwest particularly, we find that immigrants are going to be, they already do and are going to continue to play a crucial role to any development strategy for a really simple reason that the US population is getting older. So by 2065, the median age will be 42. Baby boomers are retiring at rapid rates, and this is leading to major shortages across industries and sectors. Next slide. So immigrants are playing a huge role in counteracting that. Immigrants are more likely to be of working age in the Minneapolis area, with 83.8% of them being of working age versus 69.6% of the US born population. Next slide. And then when looking at this data for St. Paul, we found that 81.5% of immigrants were of working age compared to 63.3% of US born counterparts. So despite the volatility of the past few years, and especially as we see communities and businesses opening up more and more, they are facing a real workforce shortage. Next slide. Another area that we often look at in our national research is STEM job postings. So this is one sector where we've been seeing a chronic shortage of workers in STEM fields. Nationally in 2016, there were 13 STEM job postings published online for every one unemployed STEM worker. Next slide. And when looking at this in Minnesota, we found that in 2015, there were 23.4 STEM job postings published online for every one unemployed STEM worker. So these jobs have been particularly critical over the past few years. When jobs go unfulfilled, unfortunately, companies are not able to expand their operations or grow. They can't innovate or adapt quickly to evolving markets, and this sometimes does cause companies to move elsewhere. Next slide. So when looking at immigrants in the labor force in Minneapolis, we found that immigrants are, again, playing an outsized role. While immigrants in Minneapolis made up 14.9% of the population, they are 15.8% of the employed labor force and 13.4% of the STEM workers in the region. Next slide. And then looking at the same data in St. Paul, we found that while 19.9% of the population were immigrants, they are 22.2% of the employed labor force and 17% of STEM workers. Next slide. So a big area that we like to take a look at is top industries that immigrants are working in and top occupations that have the highest share of immigrants in their workforce. So again, in Minneapolis, keeping in mind that only 14.9% of the Minneapolis population is foreign born. Despite that, immigrants are filling some really critical roles. So we found that more than 1 out of every 5 workers in construction, transportation, and warehousing is an immigrant in the Minneapolis area, and over 19% of manufacturing workers are immigrants. So immigrants also account for more than 20% of healthcare and social service workers, which are typically industries that require a degree or license, such as legal services or scientific research. Another important area that we found through this data is that immigrants living in the Minneapolis area in 2019 helped create or preserve 2,900 local manufacturing jobs that would have vanished or otherwise moved elsewhere, which again, it speaks to the broader issues that companies can't fill positions, and when they can't expand, they have difficulty sustaining. Next slide. When looking at this data for St. Paul, again, we found some of the major industries that foreign-born workers were playing the biggest share in were manufacturing, transportation and warehousing, hospitality, general services, and construction. And similarly to the Minneapolis area, immigrants living in St. Paul helped create or preserve 2,800 local manufacturing jobs that would have vanished or moved elsewhere. Next slide. So one of the areas that we look at is contributions to social programs. So as workers and taxpayers, we can see that immigrants make a huge impact, but they're also supporting federal social programs. So this is critical to note within the context, as I mentioned earlier, that nationally our population is aging out of the workforce, and they'll be increasingly relying on these programs. So in Minneapolis, we found that immigrants contributed more than $178 million to Social Security and $47 million to Medicare. Next slide. And then when looking at this data in St. Paul, we found that immigrants contributed more than $145 million to Social Security and more than $36 million to Medicare. Next slide. So again, just to put this a little bit back into national context, immigrants contributed $182 billion more to Medicare than they drew down between 1996 and 2011. So we know that immigrants are more than just taxpayers and workers, but they're also great entrepreneurs and business owners, as the Twin Cities are very familiar with. Next slide. So immigrant entrepreneurs are really driving growth, both in job creation and in local economic activity. Across the US, we see that immigrants are more likely to be entrepreneurs, and they employ over 8 million Americans, generating 1.3 trillion in sales. Next slide. So entrepreneurs in Minneapolis, we found that 13.2% of business owners or immigrants accounted for over 13.2% of all entrepreneurs. And they also generated 37.6 million in business income for the area. Next slide. And then when looking at the similar data in St. Paul, we found that over 33% of all entrepreneurs were foreign born, and they generated 43.8 million in business income for the city in 2019. So these are really great numbers to pay attention to, and also to be able to support business owners and the ability that they have in the area. Next slide. We can skip this and go. I just want to be sensitive to time. Next slide, please. So one particular area that we looked at that was specific for this cohort of Gateways for Growth was the immigrant contributions on the front lines. And we looked at specific essential industries that immigrants were playing a role in. And so we found that immigrants played really important roles in a lot of industries, including essential service workers, food service, transportation and warehousing, construction, and essential trade. And if anyone is curious about these percentages, you'll be able to find a little bit more detail in the research reports. Next slide. Another area that we look at is naturalization. This just gives us an idea of how many immigrants in the area are naturalized compared to how many immigrants in the area are potentially eligible to naturalize and how many immigrants are not eligible to naturalize. Next slide. And this includes the percentages for the St. Paul area as well on naturalization. Next slide. And one last data point I'll share with everyone is the housing wealth. So this is an area that we look at for both Minneapolis and St. Paul to really take a look at immigrant households' contributions to rent and the percent of immigrant households that are renting, and then also the immigrant households' percentage of owning their home, which does contribute to increasing the property value in the area. Next slide. And we covered this as well for St. Paul. So the data here, everything in these slides are shown in the research reports. Next slide. So I'll wrap it up there, but the overall picture that we want to share with these data points is that immigrants play an important role in the community of the Twin Cities and the state of Minnesota. We just want to highlight that not only do they keep the workforce young, but they boost tax bases, they enlarge consumer bases, and they contribute their skills and labor to very important industries and key occupations in these areas. This resource or this website listed here is the Gateways for Growth website. This holds not only the Twin Cities information, but also the past cohorts that we've had for the past 4 years, if anyone is curious on checking this out. Next slide. And then the last research I will share with you all is called maptheimpact.org. So this is a tool. It's an interactive data, a map interactive that you can look at all 50 states, the top 100 metro areas, and then all 3,000 plus US counties to look at immigrant and demographic and economic contributions of immigrants throughout the United States, if anyone has interest of checking out this data interactive. Next slide. And I'll leave it there. I'm going to be dropping the links in the chat for all of the research reports and all of this data, but we'll open it up there to some questions and I'll pass it back to Grace.
Thanks so much, Asma. So again, if folks have questions, feel free to put those in the chat. I'm happy to kick things off. I don't think I'd be fulfilling my role as the VP of Public Policy if I didn't ask some sort of advocacy legislative related question. So as we're digging through these recommendations and that research report, it's pretty clear that legislative advocacy is a huge part of turning some of these strategies into reality. And I think as most folks know, Minnesota's legislature is currently in session, and there's a number of proposals that are in play that would advance some of these strategies. There is a proposal moving through that would create an Office of Enterprise Translation. So that would mean offices have to provide translation services for written materials for all state agencies. and maintain language specific landing pages in multiple different languages. And there's also a proposal for funding for the creation of an Office of New Americans. And that office would serve immigrants and refugees in Minnesota by addressing some of those challenges that we've talked about that immigrants and refugees face in Minnesota and creating access and economic development and workforce programs. So understanding the political realities that not all of these proposals will make it across the finish line this year, would be curious for both your perspectives of how other states have approached this advocacy work and what are other policy proposals that advocates could bring forward in future sessions.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Grace. So part of the role that we take at American Immigration Council with these research reports is we just want to make sure that we provide the research and then also give examples of how past communities and past states have used this research. We always want to give the leadership to local leaders on how they want to use it, but we do like to be able to create a space of peer sharing. And so one of the ways, for example, that people have used this kind of research is looking at language access. When you are able to understand where the top countries of origin and the top languages spoken in your community, you're able to create either policies or things at the county level, city level, or even state level that create more language access for your communities as a whole. I know for example, the COVID pandemic, it was very difficult for a lot of immigrant populations to be able to access health information, vaccine information in their local language. And a lot of people and communities leaned on data like this and research reports like this to, identify what are the top 7 languages spoken in this region, in this state, that we can translate materials into so that we can provide information in local to local communities in their language spoken. Another area that we've seen people use this information is, for example, to advocate to provide the undocumented population access to driver's licenses. In some of our data, we are able to highlight specifically the undocumented population and the top major workforce industries that they play a role in. And often that can be industries that include things like transportation and warehousing and things that people do need a driver's license for. And people have been able to and will continue to use these type of research to advocate at the state level to create legislation that will provide driver's license to the undocumented population. And so we really like to play the role where we provide research and we provide examples of how other states have done this or other localities have done this kind of work and how they've turned the research into legislation, either at the state or, municipal ordinance orders. But we do take the leadership of local leaders on how they want to use this type of research. Another thing that I'll highlight is, as Grace mentioned, the effort that's going on in Minnesota to create an Office of New Americans. And so we've learned that this Gateways for Growth program really provides an opportunity for communities to do a lot of stakeholder gathering. It really creates a space of asset mapping and understanding where all the players in this state, where all the players in this county or whatever, geoscope that you're looking at, and pulling those actors together to be able to provide collective impact on a more wider basis. And that has led to states pursuing opportunities of creating an office on the state level that can collect all of these stakeholders, all of these resources and these services that are being given to immigrants in a little more of a consolidated, organized manner so that immigrants have a central location that they can go to access this type of information. So that's been one beautiful thing that we've seen grow out of these efforts. And I'll pass it on to Molly for any additional points on that question.
I would just add that I think when we talk about building a welcoming infrastructure, what that really means from a citywide level or from a statewide level, I think the opportunity to have an office of immigrant affairs or something like that really is a place not only for folks to be able to access services, but also for folks for us to really think about intergovernmental coordination across all levels. There's lots of And especially at the state level, I think there's a big opportunity, for instance, right now, when we think about things like digital equity, and how are our immigrant and refugee populations being impacted, and what are the opportunities, like through the Digital Equity Act or others, where states are actually going to be able to administer significant amounts of funds to tackle some of these issues around equity. And one of the places that we've seen it be really effective for advocacy purposes is to say, hey, we are the people in the room who are championing the opportunities and needs for our immigrant and refugee populations.
Both. And we got a question in the chat that I imagine will be coming up in at least one of our breakout sections as well, but would be curious for both of your perspective on this as well. So the question is, when working in the public sector, often folks don't sponsor work visas. So how have other public sector employees worked through changing this policy to allow for a more inclusive workforce?
That is a great question. So I think I'll start with stakeholder building and creating relationships. We found that one of the biggest actors in this space of work visas are chambers of commerce. They have the information, they have the staff, they have also the political power to be able to work on these type of programs and work on advocating for policy changes on the state level. And so we've seen in the past when cities are able, or other public sector agencies or public sector organizations are working with chambers of commerce and creating a unified front of advocating for policy changes that will create, a wider quota for work visas, or how, I know a lot of employers are dealing with the backlog that the USCIS is having currently with processing a lot of different types of visas and things like that. So although the public sector does have a little bit of limitations in what they can do within their own organization, but their ability to partner with other organizations and partner with the private sector, partner with chambers of commerce, and work together to advocate and work with legislators and advocate with elected officials to create those policy changes, we find a lot of change at that level.
I also would just add that there's some really creative programs that are fall under sort of the bracket of what we call global entrepreneur in residence kinds of programs, and they're partnerships with universities mostly that help sort of navigate the visa process for other parts of the local community. So can send a couple of resources around that as well. But again, this is a space where the complexity around visas is, and the criteria are not working to the benefit of the public sector for sure.
We got a question as well about, how much energy there is for this type of work kind of outside the metro area. And I think, Molly, maybe I'll direct this to you first, because technically the Twin Cities is not the first area in Minnesota that has taken on this work. It's Austin, Minnesota, as well, has gone through the Gateways for Growth program. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So Minnesota actually, when I think about the welcoming movement or places across the country that really have a statewide approach to welcoming, I think Minnesota is the state in the country with probably one of the most amounts of Welcoming America members, or folks who are part of this movement and doing this work. I believe there are over 20 members of Welcoming America in Minnesota. And as Grace mentioned before, I had the opportunity to work with Austin, Minnesota on the Gateways for Growth program in 2018. And right now we've seen a lot of work being led by the initiative foundations out in the more rural communities. So the Southwest Initiative Foundation, the Southern Michigan Initiative Foundation, the West Central Initiative Foundation. So there's some great community philanthropy getting involved in this work as well as folks in St. Cloud, Worthington, and some other communities. So I do think that in Minnesota there is a significant movement beyond the Twin Cities. Oh, and lots of work happening in Rochester.
And we got a question as well about a central agency that could help immigrants get a copy of their high school education document. I don't know if that's a question either of you can answer. Otherwise, I'm sure there are folks in our breakout sessions that would be able to answer that as well. But
Yeah, or would it be like in the States or in their home country? I guess would be the.
yeah, maybe that's a question we can circle back to in our breakout sections. Because before we kind of wrap up the keynote panel and move into the next one, I wanted to get in one additional question, which was, as Asma noted, the data from this research report is from 2019. So obviously the world has changed pretty significantly since then. And obviously some of the production of these research reports is incumbent on communities applying for and being awarded the opportunity. But is there a sense of when we could expect to see research results that reflect the impacts of the pandemic?
That's a really great question. So I think it unfortunately will take a few years. So we right now actually are currently, our research team is currently just in the past few weeks gotten a hold of the 2020 ACS data results. And so not only do those have limitations because the collection of that data in 2020 was very limited because of the impacts of the pandemic. So we're just in the midst of digging our teeth into that data and really looking at how it relates to past years. But I think we won't be able to see those sizable changes until we start looking at 2021 data, 2022. It'll take a few years to really be able to see that, that measurable difference that, being compared 2018 to 2022, the loss in, for example, entrepreneurship, the loss in immigrant entrepreneurs creating, some of the data that I shared, immigrant entrepreneurs created X amount of millions in this city or this area. Unfortunately, it's just that's how the way that the data is grown. And we're expecting that the 2020 data will have limitations, but it will be pretty close to the numbers of the past few years because it didn't really get a full start on of the impacts until towards like later on in 2020. And that's going to start showing up in 21, 22. And so that is something we're really, really curious about. And we really know that a lot of communities are going to be very interested on looking at that data to see, is it just going to be a blip in a few years? And then again, 2023, 24, 25, we're going to start looking the way we were before the pandemic, or are there going to be areas that really saw a significant loss and didn't have an opportunity to curve back up? So we are keeping our eye on that. And again, if anyone has specific data questions, research related questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can always communicate with our research team.
And I would just quickly add on to that, Asma, that there was some really fantastic research that you all did maybe back in the fall regarding like essential workers and folks in agriculture and gaps in the healthcare field that came out of the pandemic. So I think if there are specific industries that you all are looking to think about and then I think that some of that data could probably be extremely helpful. I know it has been to us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Molly. I can make sure to share those specific reports with Grace and she can contribute or distribute to the participants of this.
Yes, and we will make sure that any information, to the extent that we're able to access it, any information that has been referenced throughout this keynote presentation and the breakout presentations, we will make sure those are all included in the post-event email. So we're running out of time on our first hour. So I want to make sure we're able to provide instructions as to how folks can move into our breakout sessions. But thank you so much to Molly and Asma for all of this information and for your partnership as we've been moving through this work. Before I hand things off to Megan to provide instructions as to how we're going to move into our breakout sessions, I just want to remind folks that we have 3 simultaneous sessions that will further dig into the recommendations of this report. And those are community solutions, policy solutions, and employer solutions. I fully realize more than one of these panels may sound interesting to you. So I want to reassure everyone that all 3 sessions are going to be recorded. So you will be able to watch them after today. And in the short term, if you're having trouble picking which panel you might want to attend live, I might suggest approaching it thinking about, as you're looking at this list of panelists and the organizations they represent, which one of these people might you want to ask a question to and get an answer in real time. At least that's how I would approach trying to decide between all of these. So Megan, I'll hand it out to you to close us out here and move us into the breakouts.
Excellent. Thank you, Grace. And yeah, Kayla, for able to, great. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for the great presentation. Before I go into the breakout rooms, I want to just, again, thank you, Asma. Thank you, Molly, for your insight today. Thanks again to B. Kyle and to Jonathan Weinhagen for your leadership in both of our chambers. Really excited about this partnership. Before we break into the breakout rooms and I show you how that is, I wanted to highlight a couple of events that our chambers have coming up that are somewhat related to this topic as well. On Tuesday, May 10th, the Minneapolis Regional Chamber is hosting a critical issues forum, which is all around workforce challenges. We have a panel of great speakers there. That is an in-person breakfast networking event. So just wanted to highlight that. Our two chambers are coming back together on Friday, May 13th for a welcoming back to the Minnesota Twins season. It's a really fun luncheon and event. So if you're interested in winning some swag and bobbleheads and excited about the new Twin season, recommend checking that event out. And then also the St. Paul Area Chamber is hosting, as part of their Equity Leadership Series, their next event. This is a monthly event. It's Changing Systems That Create Inequity in Our Workplace. And that is a virtual event coming up on Wednesday, May 18th from 7:30 to 9:30 in the morning. You will see momentarily in our chat, if it hasn't been dropped in already, links to both the Minneapolis Regional Chamber and the St. Paul Area Chamber events pages. So please check those out if you're interested in learning more. That's just highlighting a few. So what we're going to do now is we are going to give you the option to choose which breakout room you would like to go into. So we have 3 different breakout rooms. One is around community solutions, the other one is around policy solutions, and the third one is around employer solutions. As Grace just mentioned, each one of these breakout sessions will be recorded. So if you missed one of them, don't worry, in our wrap up email, we will make sure that you get links to watch the recording for all of these. But at this time, we'll keep the slide up and I'm going to invite my other hosts to open up the breakout rooms. You can take a look at who our moderators and leaders are in each of these breakout rooms and choose for yourself which room you would like to join. We'll leave this open for a second. At this time, if you don't see the little bar up on your screen, if you look down at the bottom, there should be an option for breakout rooms and it says join a breakout room. Go ahead and click on that and go ahead and choose which one you are interested in joining. Thanks again for being with us here today. I'm going to go ahead and join group number 1, but we will have a host here in our main room. If for some reason you get logged back out, we'll make sure to get you in and get you into that breakout room that you would prefer. Thanks again for being with us today. Looking forward to continued conversation in these breakout rooms. We'll see you soon. Thank you.